Welcome back to Gaga's Fiction, where we dive deep into the world of Naruto. In today's episode, we explore the intriguing what-if scenario of Naruto activating an overpowered bloodline. Get ready for an epic journey, as we unveil Episode 3. He gazed at the village from his office window, wondering how bad things really were in Konoha. Despite his changed appearance and more measured demeanor, everyone still hated Naruto. Some even said that the fox had taken over his grandson's body. A few people had expressed regret for mistreating an obviously innocent boy, even if he had become the QB. Most, however, had already called for a meeting to discuss exterminating the creature before it caused problems like last time. Closed-minded idiots, he thought. What annoyed him even more was knowing that the council's advice was to treat Naruto poorly, especially a woman from the civil council. He couldn't understand her at all. After all, Naruto was his daughter's friend and had saved her life multiple times. How could Mebuki harbor so much hatred for the boy? How had that hatred multiplied now that it seemed his daughter was treating Naruto much better than before? He could even say that she was developing a healthy crush on him, far healthier than her obsession with the Uchiha. He had gotten to know Naruto practically from scratch, and the boy was demonstrating his full potential. He had observed Sakura Haruno before the Chunin exams, a girl seeking attention but not making much effort to excel. Now, along with Ino Yamanaka, he could see a change. 2 weeks had passed since the preliminary rounds, and just by watching them walk, he could tell they were improving. It wasn't very obvious, of course, as they had just started training, but it was a significant change from their recent graduation. Even their chakra had increased exponentially. At the end of this month, after training with Naruto, they could consider using elemental ninjutsu, category D. Progress was progress. But they weren't the only ones. It seemed the exam had been beneficial not only for Naruto, Sakura, and Ino but also for other rookies, excluding Sasuke. He had recovered quickly, and Kakashi had started training him a week ago. Kiba Inuzuka had asked his mother for training. The humiliation he had endured had brought down his ego a bit but boosted his determination to improve. Shino Aburame had chosen a similar path, training with Guy to enhance his taijutsu, something Naruto had also done to a much lesser extent. From what Guy had told him, Naruto had only asked for instructions and then left. Shikamaru didn't train much physically, but he asked various ninjas to play shogi with him. He was pleased because the game improved tactical thinking, whether for defense or offense. The Naras were strong in this aspect, but there was always room for improvement. Choji Akimichi was on a similar path but in a rather unusual and unique way. He started eating even more than he used to and meditated with his father every afternoon. It was good because the Akimichi clan's signature jutsu required intense concentration when expanding the body. Choji could do it easily, but reaching his father's level would take time, especially if he continued on his previous aimless path. Perhaps the most surprising transformation was Hinata Hyuga's, not because she was training or anything like that. Most of the time she had spent out of the hospital, she was with a girl he didn't recognize, definitely a foreigner visiting the village. Hinata appeared much more self-assured, smiled a lot more, and seemed to be enjoying life for the first time in her short existence. The strange girl had had a positive impact, as only she had been able to bring out that level of cheerfulness, radiance, and optimism in Hinata. She didn't even realize how her presence affected others because those who observed her from afar had also felt a glimmer of that optimism. On the other hand, it seemed that one of the village's closest Shin'an squads had broken up. Rock Lee had been hospitalized for 2 weeks, of which only 2 days were spent conscious. The damage to his limbs was concerning, and he was almost certain that only one person could heal him enough to walk again without a wheelchair or feed himself. However, the same woman wanted nothing to do with the village. The girl who had seemed romantically interested in her last team member a couple of weeks ago now preferred to be alone. Tenten trained and spent most of her time alone. The only contact she had with her group was with Lee, who was still in the hospital. It appeared that their experiences during the exam, not only what happened to her teammate but also what the other contestant did to her family, had made her withdraw and distance herself. Meanwhile, Neji Hyuga, the last member of Guy's team, had been a loner long before graduating from the academy. He had the same concerns for him as he did for Sasuke Uchiha, the possibility of turning into renegade ninjas to fulfill their vendettas. The Uchiha was more worrisome, but Neji wasn't far behind. He couldn't blame the boy too much. Hiashi Hyuga was like a kunai in the rear every time he opened his mouth at council meetings. He didn't want to imagine what it was like to live with that man for about 15 hours a day. He sighed, tired. These 2 weeks had been very tough. During times like these, he wondered why on earth he had taken up the role again. He had been so happy to retire and leave all that paperwork and stress behind. He must have been drunk when he decided to return. Chunin exams, in particular, were always a headache because he had to ensure that the exams ran smoothly from start to finish. He also had to arrange everything to make the visiting dignitaries comfortable during the finals, not so much the civilians but the Kazekage and the few members of the Suna Council who gathered. The work was quite complicated, as every 5-star hotel in Konoha wanted them to stay there. He received brochures and documents from hotels daily, each trying to outdo the other. But perhaps the most difficult and complicated task he had undertaken during this time was the investigation into the Ninja Academy. Naruto had informed him of the problems he faced, so he immediately gathered information. Almost all the teachers who had taught Naruto at some point, except Iruka, were now jonin. They had all handed in confusing and incomplete reports about Naruto. Iruka was the only one who hadn't sabotaged Naruto because his reports were extensive, bordering on redundancy, but they were very thorough in explaining the issues he saw in his student. He supposed that after being sabotaged so much, Naruto simply stopped trying, even though he later had a competent teacher. What was strange was that Hiashi hadn't lifted a finger to fix this problem. He should have noticed the inconsistencies in Naruto's education, but he had done nothing to rectify it and had not said anything to strip the culprits of their ninja ranks. Anyway, he was tired, and the exams were not over yet. He was also waiting for the council meeting to begin. He could already guess what they wanted. First, they would complain about Naruto, as always. Then they would demand his death or imprisonment. With a bloodline like his, they probably wanted him to become a breeding machine. He only hoped to get more than 2 hours of sleep tonight. He deserved a break. He was no longer young enough to handle this much stress, fixing the problems of those who couldn't see beyond their noses. Cursed be the day I accepted this job, he muttered, looking at the Hokage mountain where the faces of Konoha's Kages stood, imposing. 2 weeks had passed since the start of his training, and everything seemed to be going exceptionally well, especially his bloodlines, which he could use more comfortably and smoothly. His scythe, in particular, was becoming easier to handle because it was primarily used for defense. Of course, he had to train to handle them correctly and avoid accidentally injuring an ally, but it wasn't as complicated as the scythe, being a large weapon, especially because each part of it was a weapon on its own. The second Kekkei Genkai was very dangerous, especially when used on himself, and was difficult to control properly when his chakra was too low or became unmanageable due to uncontrolled emotions. The third was the most dangerous of the three, extremely powerful but equally risky if not controlled correctly, which was most of the time. He had only managed to use it for a maximum of 20 minutes without going completely crazy. It was a Kekkei Genkai that was too powerful, too heavy to handle swiftly. Nevertheless, his training was progressing in leaps and bounds, and he could already envision how he would defeat Gaara in a way that would break him, and also those other 2 chakra presences within him. He would make Gaara pay for what he had done to Lee and make those other 2 presences that seemed to influence the boy retreat deep into his subconscious out of fear. In completely different news, Sakura and Ino seemed to be adapting to training very well. He had helped them so much with their own development that he felt he owed them something. He had pushed them to their limits to showcase their full potential, and now the results were visible. They were much happier and more confident. Initially, it had been tough because neither had eaten properly since before they graduated, which had greatly reduced their performance as Kanoikas. They had started with that and gradually worked their way up to the required level. It was astonishing how flexible both of them were, their excellent chakra control, and how they could manage it so well, even as it increased rapidly. They had attempted a few elemental ninjutsu, but they weren't ready for that yet. However, their speed, reflexes, and taijutsu were in excellent condition, and they could engage in a fight that made their previous exam look like child's play. But training wasn't the only thing he had done. They had gone out a couple of times as friends, to the cinema or for a meal. Ino had even convinced him to go dancing. At first, he was completely reluctant, but when he arrived, he realized it wasn't much different from taijutsu. It was a much more fluid kind of taijutsu, more in tune with his body and his surroundings. Feeling the music running through his system, filling his blood with adrenaline and energizing his muscles to move was an incredible experience. Sakura and Ino weren't the only girls who had pulled him out of his training routine. Kurenai, Anko, Hana, Yugao, Temari, Kin, and Ayame had all persuaded him to go somewhere different, either as a couple or even all together to have fun. It was something he had never experienced. He tended to avoid large groups, especially of girls, because they used to beat him, insult him, and humiliate him. But this had been a completely different experience, something he greatly appreciated. Furthermore, as all of them were girls, he had been able to experience a different kind of training, interacting with a girl he liked. He had tried that with Sakura, but he decided to forget it because he had only made a fool of himself. His current training involved learning to compliment them naturally without being obscene. They liked being noticed and appreciated, with attention to their features and attributes, but not in a foolish or perverted way, and not for extended periods that made the appreciation seem obscene. He had to learn never to overstep boundaries and understand where it was acceptable to touch and where it was not, even if he had done it purely by accident. For example, he learned that touching a girl on her upper back, around the shoulder blades, was being a gentleman and a good friend. However, placing his hand on the lower back, not too low either, was being a gentleman and demonstrating attraction to the girl in question, showing his interest. In just a week of going out with so many girls, one could say that not only had he bonded with them, but they were becoming good friends with each other as well. Of course, each had their likes and dislikes, and their ages varied, so they had to figure out how they fit with each other. But it seemed to be going very well. His life finally had color, it was a life, and he didn't want anything to take him away from the happiness he had yearned for and was finally beginning to experience. As such, he had started to research Fuinjutsu with the intention of learning not only about his father's catastrophic seal but also about the seal that Orochimaru had placed on Ken. Progress was slow but steady, and every passing day, they learned a bit more about the seal. It helped that the others were also involved, even though they didn't understand much, they always brought information back to Naruto. "Let me see if I got this right," Kin sighed, scratching her stomach. "This thing is going to suck my chakra and life energy to summon something." Naruto nodded. "I'm not exactly sure what the jutsu is called," he began, reading the paper with everything he had written, "but, as I said before, it's precisely that. Like I mentioned earlier, it's going to use you as a sacrifice to bring something that shouldn't be here, something that shouldn't be in this realm." They were all gathered in the hot spring pool. Naruto had learned to trust all the girls present not to reveal the location to anyone, and he had also found a couple of seals that made the place much more secure and private than any other spot in the village. All the girls had helped with that, so they were all present. "But is there any way to remove this seal?" Kurenai asked, her hand on her chin, deep in thought. She didn't know much about seals, but she did know that there was usually a way to undo something like this, like a way to dissolve it. "The seal is a kind of parasite," Naruto murmured, looking at the papers. "The longer it stays in a host, the more deeply it's rooted and, therefore, the more difficult to separate. I've been studying a lot about Fuinjutsu, and I think I can change certain runes to make it no longer linked to Orochimaru." "What do you mean?" Ino asked, confused. Naruto thought for a moment to figure out how to explain it. "As I said, the seal is a kind of sacrifice ritual. Orochimaru is connected to the seal and is the one who activates it to start the summoning. I'm not completely sure yet, but I can change it to be linked to me." "But doesn't that mean the summoning will also drain part of your chakra?" Sakura asked, not pleased with Naruto putting himself at risk in this way, especially when they didn't know what he wanted to summon. "To summon the snake, that would be very dangerous. But if I don't do it, Orochimaru will do as he pleases. If we manage to pass the seal on to someone else, it won't change anything, that person would still die for the snake's ambition. The only difference is that we save Ken. What you want to do is to further frustrate that bastard's plans, and I like it," Anko commented, licking her lips, causing some of the other girls to shiver in fear. Naruto nodded. "My idea is to change the seal slightly, not just so that it's linked to me, but also to change what it wants to summon. We might not know how the change will affect it until it's done, but it should thoroughly frustrate Orochimaru's plans." "But you'd also need to change the seals on Dosu and Zaku," Kin pointed out. "Are you worried about them?" Naruto asked. Kin shook her head quickly, as if saying yes would be bad for some reason, which had more to do with Naruto than her former teammates. "No, they were always idiots. They tried to violate me more than once, and I lost count of how many times they tried to kill me." Everyone furrowed their brows, both disgusted and appalled. Now, they had even more reason to want those two dead. "Then there's no problem. I just have to sneak into their dormitory and change the necessary runes," Naruto said. "But I have to practice because I don't know how the seal will react if I make a mistake. As I said, it's like a parasite." They nodded, understanding the potential dangers involved. Fuinjutsu was a highly complicated and temperamental art. A single line slightly askew could completely alter what was intended. "What about changing the host body?" Hana asked. "That must be even more complicated." Naruto looked from Kin to Hana and sighed. "I have a vague idea, but..." "But?" Yugao asked. She was the deadliest among them, having taught Naruto Kenjutsu to handle his scythe correctly and being an Anbu. Changing the seal in the host's body is even more dangerous, Naruto said. It's dangerous not only for the current host, Kin, but also for me, the next host, and the only way I see for it to detach from Kin's body is by giving it something to eat. They looked at him, confused and not understanding what he meant. As I said, the seal is like a parasite, like a rabid animal, and right now, it's feeding on Kin, absorbing her chakra and life energy. The longer it stays in her, the more it will want. It will want not just her chakra but her flesh too. Kin's eyes widened with fear as the others gasped, worried for their new friend. It's going to eat me, she whispered, terrified. Not yet, but it could get to that point, especially if Orochimaru takes too long to initiate the summoning, Naruto reassured her. It will hold onto your body with all it has. How do we do it, then? Temari asked. She was a little nervous. When she had first heard what was happening, she couldn't believe it. But seeing everything she had seen, her father's erratic behavior, there was no better proof. They had been deceived. However, as a simple Genin, she knew that no one would pay much attention to her. That was the reason she had joined the group in the first place, to do something about the man who had deceived them. Naruto ran his hand through his hair. We tempt it, give it something more substantial, something with more chakra, life energy, and flesh to consume while it detaches from Kin, and we give it the new host. So, we'd have to sacrifice 2 innocent lives, Hana murmured, a little nervous. She might be a ninja, but she was a veterinary ninja, precisely because she didn't want to end up in a life or death fight. In truth, only one, Naruto responded. The new host would definitely have to be human, but for the bait, I was thinking of one of the death forest tigers or, even better, a bear. They had all seen the animals in that forest, and if a tiger standing on all fours was larger than a standing human, they couldn't imagine a bear. Plus, they were powerful and could use chakra in a very animalistic manner. Okay, so when do we start the tests? Kin asked, eager to get rid of that damn seal. Right now, Naruto said, standing up. The meeting had started as boring as it usually did, especially with the idiotic civil council trying to gain more power than they needed in a ninja village. The shinobi council wasn't much better, except for a couple of clans. They began by discussing the village's economy and how it could be improved with the Chunin exam finals fast approaching. Then, they talked about transportation and more profitable trade routes for both exports and imports, which required cutting down trees in the forest for several kilometers in various directions. What Naruto expected to be the focal point of discussion started as usual, with Sasuke Uchiha in the spotlight. The civil council, especially Mebuki Haruno, praised him as if he were some kind of almighty god. Naruto briefly wondered if Sakura's obsession hadn't been influenced by her mother as well. He was sure that Sakura's family would benefit from that because they would become members of a ninja clan, and not just any clan, but one that had essentially founded the village. On the other hand, the shinobi council was not very pleased with Sasuke. The major clans despised him because he belonged not only to their competition but also to a clan full of pesky, disloyal pests with an excessive thirst for power. But just as with the civil council, many of the middle and minor clans praised him like a god. The cursed seal is dangerous, we should kill the brat, and we'd save ourselves many problems, Hiashi commented, his stick so far up his rear end that it reached his stomach, making his face even more unpleasant than before. The civil council and some clan leaders sneered. He's the last loyal Uchiha in the village, and therefore the only one with a Sharingan, the most powerful dojutsu. Killing him would be a waste. Besides, we're in the middle of the Chunin exam finals, with many important people present, and the Kazekage, in particular, is on his way to the village to watch him fight. We would be the laughingstock of all 5 elemental nations if we killed him. We could just extract the semen from his system before we kill him, so that's not an issue, Sume Inuzuka said, bored. She thought these sessions were useless, they could never agree on anything. Whatever, the leader of a minor clan said, looking rough and with dirty brown hair. His voice was raspy, almost like that of a fox. Kakashi-san is training him, the only one who can teach Uchiha to use his dojutsu. I doubt he'll leave with that opportunity. Plus, according to the recordings, Uchiha can control the cursed seal. For how long? Shikaku Nara muttered, annoyed and almost as bored as Tsume. The cursed seal tempts you, lures you into the web. Sasuke Uchiha is a ticking time bomb that could explode in our faces if we don't defuse it. The civil council sneered again. They couldn't see the gravity of the situation, couldn't see that Sasuke could kill them, and he would if given the chance, especially for more power. Because he'll leave, one of the civilians mocked, he's got a fan club here, most likely enough girls to be his partners, one of the best jonin in the village as his teacher, and within a few years, he could become the Hokage. Sarutobi immediately glared at her, hated his job, but he wouldn't give it to an Uchiha pest for anything. From what I saw in the recordings, Naruto Uzumaki has even more potential than Uchiha, Inoki Yamanaka said, hating Uchiha and liking Naruto. Besides, the way his daughter had been talking about him, and how he had helped her, he couldn't see another boy as his son-in-law. And that's not to mention that he wasn't properly trained in the use of his Kekkei Genkai. The civil council erupted again, along with most of the shinobi council. If there was one thing they all agreed on, it was that Naruto needed to disappear from Konoha, dead or imprisoned, buried 100 meters underground. That demon was just lucky, and we should force him to give the technique to Sasuke Uchiha, who would use it much better, Mebuki commented, with a sense of grandeur. Everyone stared at her as if she had grown a second head, the civilians smiling, while the shinobi looked at her as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. That's a great idea. I'm sure we'd have the most powerful ninja from all 5 elemental nations if we handed him that power, another civilian chimed in. They're so stupid, Choza Akimichi commented, shaking his head, as the civilians glared at him, ready to shout at him. Do you even understand what a Kekkei Genkai is? The place fell into complete silence for a moment, as the civilians looked at each other, and then they let Mebuki speak because her answer came out more like a question. Even the members of the minor clans, who usually supported her, smacked their foreheads with their hands, frustrated by the stupidity in the room. Something that can be passed through a blood transfusion? Although her response sounded more like a question. Even the shinobi council members who usually supported her smacked their foreheads with their hands, frustrated by the stupidity in the room. Kekkei Genkai means that it can only be used by the user, Hiruzen began, looking with annoyance at all the civilians. And it can only be passed down from blood parents to blood children, not through a blood transfusion, not through any trick, not even the Sharingan can copy a Kekkei Genkai. The civilians continued to look at him as if they didn't understand what they were told, so they decided to continue with the meeting. Anyway, Sume muttered, tired of the idiocy she had witnessed in the room. Has Uzumaki thought about recreating his clan here in the village? Hiruzen smiled because someone had finally brought up the subject. I mentioned it to him, but he's not sure yet. First, he wants to become a chunin before deciding, and I think he'll achieve it. As expected, the old war hawk, Danzo, stared at him carefully. By the furrow of his brow, it was clear that Naruto becoming a chunin was not in his best interests. Returning his clan to life in Konoha would be great, Inoki said, already thinking about how to start the conversation with his daughter. The Uzumaki clan is one of the most powerful clans. Having it in Konoha would only increase our prestige and help maintain the peace we've had for a long time, Choza added. Shikaku agreed with a nod. In addition to this strange change he apparently went through, it made him a magnet for women. I don't think it will be that difficult for him to find a couple of loving wives. He said it with such mockery that Sume hit him, the same way his wife and the wives of their friends did. Poor Naruto would have to put up with that with more than one woman. How can you talk about giving so much power to a monster, to an abomination? Mebuki complained. Well, if we gave it to you, I don't see the problem in giving it to a fine young man like Naruto, Sume joked, making the other 5 leaders who supported Naruto laugh. Mebuki remained there, not understanding why they were laughing. Certainly, he's a danger to the village, Hyashi muttered, taking a sip from his teacup, which he had brought from home, and drank it calmly. The change might have been caused by the Kyuubi, and who knows what consequences it might bring in the long run. We can't risk the demon being released. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes, looking at Hyashi, studying him. Danzo jumped in, making a proposal with a small smile. I think it's the best idea, one of the middle clan leaders interjected. We ensure that the demon is a weapon for Konoha and keep him in the village until it's necessary for the Uzumaki clan to be recreated as a weapon. An overwhelming sense of killing intent filled the room, making civilians and weak ninja begin to choke. I've grown tired of repeating myself, Hiruzen said. Naruto is not going to be trained by root. Naruto is not a weapon, and, in particular, the Uzumaki clan is not going to be a weapon. Whoever talks about this subject that way will be taken to the dungeons, tortured, and then publicly executed for treason. The room fell into complete silence, but the killing intent lingered. This was a common occurrence in these meetings. It was usually a civilian who opened their mouth and filled the room with killing intent. Still, the leaders of the minor and middle clans, to a lesser extent, even some of the major clans, had done so occasionally. The topic always revolved around one person, Naruto. Since he was a baby, the councils had tried to kill him, exile him, imprison him, and he couldn't remember what else. He had even made good on his threats with a couple of civilians who had defied his orders, and now they rested 6 meters underground. It appeared that many more desired to follow in their footsteps, rotting away in misery. The killing intent faded, allowing everyone to breathe again. Very well, now that I've said that, I hope no one tries to force my grandson into an arranged marriage, Hiruzen continued, his gaze filled with killing intent that sent civilians trembling. As I've said before, he's not thinking about it right now, he's training and preparing for the final, in which he'll fight a very powerful ninja. He'll consider the topic only if Naruto and the girl in question agree, and both have feelings for each other. He looked at them all with murderous intent, making the civilians almost pee their pants. The meeting is over, get out of here. The civil council rushed out as usual, while the shinobi council tried to appear as if their knees weren't trembling. A couple of days had passed since they had started with the test for both seals. They had ended up killing more animals than expected, naturally giving them a proper burial. Finally, it seemed like they had everything ready. Naruto had to make some corrections here and there, consulting a couple of books Hiruzen had lent him about Fuinjutsu. He was grateful to the Hokage because, without those books, he wouldn't have been able to complete the seals. Despite his strong affinity for seal art, he was still a beginner and relied heavily on the books he had. At last, both seals were ready, and the tests yielded the expected results. Now they had only one problem left, catching a house-sized bear, resistant to elemental chakra attacks, and very, very angry. Get down! Naruto shouted as they watched a tree flying towards them. Temari managed to get out of the way, while Sakura and Ino crawled on the ground, cursing the day they let Anko convince them to re-enter the training ground. Anko, Kurenai, Hana, and the triplets jumped onto the branches of a tree to avoid the attack. Naruto, trap it with those damn chains. Yugao screamed, furious and topless after a bear swipe had torn her shirt to shreds. Then I'll peel that damned animal's skin off. Naruto shuddered in fear upon hearing the usually affectionate and even slightly maternal Yugao talking as if she were a ruthless assassin. I think I'm much weaker physically than the bear, Naruto said softly to avoid angering her. If I trap it with chains, it'll send me flying. After all, the bear measures around 20 to 25 feet in height and about 10 to 15 feet in width. It's monstrously powerful, physically. If we consider that any animal in the forest of death can feed off and use chakra, it's a complete suicide mission. Then how do we catch it without killing it? Anko asked. She had been living in the forest, but she had never thought to enter a bear's den. Do we need it alive? Definitely, Naruto responded as he cut a branch with his scythe. If it's not alive, it won't have the chakra and life force the parasite needs to feed. They dodged another tree just in time as a 300-ton bear lunged at them with a row of enormous and sharp teeth, trying to chew them like a snack. Start giving ideas, Yugao growled, avoiding another bear swipe. Give them now. It's really mad, Sakura said, not sure whether she was more afraid of the bear or Yugao. Yeah, if my shirt got torn, I'd be mad too, Ino added. At least they were in much better physical condition now. They couldn't fight the bear, but they could easily dodge its attacks, making it good training for everyone. The nearby members of the group glanced at the blonde girl as if she were insane. We're in the middle of the most dangerous training field in the village, and you and Yugao are thinking about fashion? Kurenai said, unable to believe it. It was an original from Shori Haikitsu. It took me 5 months to save up to buy it, grumbled Yugao, making Kurenai raise her hands defensively. Ino was breathless at the thought that this shirt had been created by the best fashion designer in the elemental nations. Then why did you come with it? Asked Hana, hidden among a branch with the triplets. Yugao blushed as she scratched her left arm. I was called while I was with Hayate, and I forgot to change. Naruto shook his head and looked around, sensing the bear nearby but not knowing where the heck it was. One of the ways to use chakra for animals was as if it were everywhere, and he couldn't detect it with his ability. Hana, don't you have some tranquilizer or something? He asked, looking at the brunette. I don't have anything to put that kind of beast to sleep, she replied, apologetically with her gaze. Aren't there any sleep-inducing plants around here? Asked Temari. Naruto and I can use wind attacks to carry the dust to the bear and put it to sleep. The place fell silent except for the sounds of the forest. We didn't think of that before, Kin said, annoyed at having wasted so much time. We have a plan, let's go, ordered Anko, jumping to another tree. The bear will definitely follow us, and we'll only have one chance as they tend to learn from their mistakes. We'll go ahead and direct the bear to the spot, Naruto commented. It's only in front, right? Anko nodded as she looked back where the others were following closely. There are huge yellow flowers. As soon as you see them, stop breathing, or you'll fall asleep before you blink. When you're about 5 minutes away from the plants, stop breathing and try to climb as high as you can. Naruto finished before leaping faster, accompanied by Temari. Both were adept at the wind element, so their attack would carry the pollen quickly to the bear. Naruto, with his sensory ability, could easily detect when they were in position to launch the attacks. The problem was, could they hold their breath for that long? How good are you at holding your breath? Naruto asked. Temari looked back at him, a little surprised that he hadn't made the slightest sound as they traveled at that speed. Besides, she looked damn hot with her blood-red hair waving in the wind, her face and clothes a little dirty, but determination clearly marking her features. Very good. Something came to mind that they could do while holding their breath that would be satisfying at the same time. She blushed and looked ahead again. Well, we'll have to wait a little before they arrive. As soon as they saw the yellow flowers opening and releasing a strange orange pollen, they took a breath and entered the cloud. Their eyes stung a bit, but otherwise, they were fine. They reached the level of the flowers and stopped, looking back at where they had come from. Naruto began to expand his ability, another thing he had trained very well, and they waited. 3 minutes later, Naruto looked at Temari and nodded. They immediately started making hand signs quickly and launched the attacks that carried the pollen and opened up the scene as if they had removed a tablecloth from a table without spilling anything. Their senses alerted them to danger, and they quickly jumped away, breathing easily. When they looked back, they noticed a kind of green tentacles writhing from side to side, trying to trap their prey, and the flowers were open like mouths, with a viscous purple liquid dripping from each petal. That's gross and terrifying at the same time, said Temari. Naruto agreed with a sigh. If they took any longer, they would become fertilizer for the plant and the bear's meal. They shrugged and began to jump back. They had to climb much higher to avoid any residue of pollen, but in a couple of minutes, they were reunited with the other girls. How did the plan go? The redhead asked. We're not sure because we have to wait a bit to come down, but we stopped hearing the growls, and it stopped hitting the tree, Kin replied. They remained silent, expecting something while Yugao and Anko stared at the ground or what they could see of the ground with so many branches and leaves, making sure the pollen was disappearing. We should be fine now, the snake princess commented, nodding. It seems like the pollen has dispersed, agreed the other purple-haired girl. All right, we better hurry, Naruto murmured, looking at everyone. This is going to be a bit disturbing and very painful, so it's best if you're asleep, he finished, glancing at the clearly nervous Kin. Why didn't you say that earlier? Kurenai asked. We could have put her to sleep with the pollen, which would leave her unconscious for about 12 hours, unable to feel anything. Naruto shrugged, somewhat embarrassed. It just occurred to me. They fell silent for a moment before shaking their heads. They couldn't really blame him, as he had the most work to do, researching everything related to the seal, trying to learn as much as he could about Fuinjutsu, an incredibly complicated ninja art, and training for the finals. All right, prepare everything while Kin and I go back to the flowers and put her to sleep, Anko said, nodding. It shouldn't be too much trouble. Be careful, those things have disgusting tentacles to catch their prey, said Temari, looking disgusted. Anko nodded, while Kin could only get even more nervous. Sakura and Ino looked at everyone, not sure what to do. The truth was that this had been more of a training for them than anything else. It's not like they could help much with what they were doing. Once they lost sight of the two, they descended from the tree carefully. Naruto was the first to land and see the giant bear asleep as if in hibernation. He was still surprised by the enormous size of it. He knew that things in that forest were big, ugly, and lethal, but he didn't expect such a monstrous creature. So, how do we do this? Hana asked, along with the triplets who were still tense even though the bear was asleep. Naruto sighed, already feeling the tension of what they were about to do. We have to peel its back so I can draw the seal. The whole back? Ino asked. The entire back, Naruto whispered. The seal is going to take up all the space. Like I said, this won't be pretty. With that, everyone began to work. The bear's fur was thick, strong, and seemed to subtly consume their chakra as they touched it. These animals were quite an experiment, a rarity of nature, and they seemed quite similar to summoning creatures, only without the ability to speak. By the time Anko returned with Kin asleep on her shoulder, they were halfway through. But the snake princess knew a couple of tricks, having lived in the forest for a long time, far from the village, which treated her almost as badly as they treated Naruto. She had to learn something with so much experience. A couple of minutes later, the bear's back was completely stripped, and Naruto could start inscribing the runes and kanji of his seal. Watching him work with such concentration, all the girls started to feel a bit excited. They couldn't explain how writing could make it seem so hot, but it did. They also couldn't explain how Naruto was sweating more from this than from his fight with the bear. When he had finished half of the seal, he decided to take a break to eat and drink. "It's better that you bring the ninja we caught," he whispered tiredly. He took off his shirt and wiped his face with it. He was extremely tense. "All right," Sakura replied, unable or unwilling to look away from Naruto's body. Kurenai next to her closed her mouth and smiled playfully. "You'd better stop drooling," she whispered. Sakura blushed, while Ino laughed at her friend. "Shut up, Ino, you perv," she said, crossing her arms as a shield. "And wipe your chin, you're worse than me. You pervert." It was Ino's turn to blush and quickly wipe her chin. "I'll go get the ninja," Hana said. She had skills like the animals thanks to her clan, so she apparently was the only one who realized that Naruto was exuding pheromones with the slightest movement. She was also the most affected by them. If she didn't leave right now, she would throw herself at the red-haired boy and do something she had promised not to do until they finished this exam. Kurenai and her stupid idea of letting Naruto concentrate on his training since she found them in that store had been making her feel hot ever since. She couldn't help but imagine the boy on top of her. Every time they went out, she could feel Naruto's pheromones suffocating her. She was holding back her desires with all her willpower, and she didn't like it. She rushed to the tower where they had left the poor man who would receive that disgusting seal, leaving behind the boy who was now shirtless and sweaty. She was sure his pheromones had only increased when Yugao lost her shirt. It was so unfair, even the advantage that Sakura and Ino had because they trained with him almost every day. She didn't know how she could endure the pheromones when she clearly didn't have the willpower to. Hana might not have held back. She opened her eyes and growled in annoyance. Those two had surely broken their promise and already had a piece of Naruto. She would talk to that pair later. The triplets following her could only find her amusing. They also knew that Naruto was unintentionally emitting pheromones, and they knew how the women in the group were feeling. But they had never seen their owner like this, and it seemed like the funniest thing in the world. Naruto returned to his work a minute after Hana had left. The work was tedious and, if he were honest with himself, a little boring. But it had to be perfect. A single small mistake, a single line drawn wrong, an extra dot, or even a slight deviation in the tracing of a rune, and everything would go to waste. He had to put all his concentration into the work to make sure everything went well and save his friend. When Hana returned with the naked man, tied up with a seal very similar to Kin's but with its differences, Naruto was already drawing the last rune on the bear's skin. The man's seal, almost the same but with a few differences and still giving off the smell of death even when it wasn't active, also gave Naruto a strange feeling. It wasn't just because it was tied to his chakra. He had made the seal following the instructions in the books but also following a strange hunch. He smiled when he finished the seal and checked it thoroughly to ensure there were no flaws. He purred with pride when he realized it was perfect. He furrowed his brow in confusion, shrugged, and climbed down from the bear's back. "Now, I want all of you to get up into the branches, except for Yugao and Kurenai, who have to hold Kin," he said. They nodded and jumped onto branches that were high enough to be safe but still allowed them to see and hear everything. "What's going to happen?" Kurenai asked. "I'm not entirely sure," he sighed again and nodded to the two girls, who held Kin's arms and legs securely. "I'm going to activate the first seal." Yugao and Kurenai nodded. Naruto started making a couple of hand signs at an astonishing speed and then touched the seal on the bear's back. At first, nothing happened, but within a second, it began to glow, illuminating the dark forest. At the same time, Kin's mouth opened, emitting a strange scream, her voice much hoarser and deeper, as if several voices were speaking at once. She began to twist in her place, making it very difficult to hold her correctly. Her shirt tore apart, completely exposing her torso, to everyone's amazement. They noticed that the skin was raised, forming a strange hand-shaped silhouette, as if something inside Kin wanted to come out of her stomach. As it disappeared, another appeared, and another, as if something inside Kin wanted to get out. On the branches, everyone watched in shock as Yugao and Kurenai felt a strong urge to vomit. Kin let out another scream, and a strange black jelly-like substance shot out of her mouth, pulsating like a heart, with hands still visible on its surface, as if something were trying to get out. When it fully emerged from the black-haired girl's body, the seal it had turned into ink again and dissolved. This strange black jelly began to advance, the hands on it moving it toward the bear, where Naruto was still channeling chakra into the seal. When the jelly reached the bear's level, one hand pushed harder until it touched the seal. As soon as it made contact, The seal absorbed the mass, leaving only a black trace to show what had happened. That's disgusting, Sakura said, her face green, kneeling on the branch and feeling like she was about to vomit. What was that? Ino also commented, it even smelled like rotten trash. It was the parasite, Temari replied, still barely standing but just about. She had seen many things in her life, but this had been on another level. How disturbing, Hana added, her previous excitement completely forgotten. Naruto moved to where Kurenai and Yugao were tending to Kin, who was sobbing despite being deeply asleep. It seems like it broke a few ribs, bruises are starting to appear, and it deviated her trachea slightly, Yugao murmured, assessing her friend. It also appears to have torn a couple of muscles, nothing I can't heal, luckily. She'll just need to remain completely still for at least a week. As soon as she finished speaking, the bear rose with a painful and furious roar. Naruto reacted in time, taking Yugao and Kurenai with his chains and holding Kin in his arms as he jumped to a branch. What's going on? Sakura asked. I think it's fighting, Naruto replied as he watched the bear move clumsily and collide with a tree as if trying to stop the pain. A moment later, they heard the sound of bones breaking, making the bear, still unconscious despite everything, roar in pain. Blood began to flow as the skin tore, and they saw that the skin in different areas was retracting as if they had drained the fluid from that area, causing everything to contract. The bear's chest caved in with a bone-crushing crunch, and almost immediately its eyes exploded. With one final roar, the bear fell on its back, dead. But the flesh began to retreat, the parasite was still feeding, and it was doing so at an alarming rate. I have to activate the other seal, Naruto said as he jumped. While the redhead was making hand signs, they saw how what had begun as just skin and bones of an enormous body began to dissolve and turn back into that black jelly-like substance. Again, they could see hands trying to escape from it. By the time Naruto activated the second seal on the man, the bear no longer existed, and the mass was approaching Naruto, with its hands stretching as if searching for more flesh to consume. Naruto placed his hands on the seal on the ninja's chest, thinking that he didn't want to do this to even his worst enemy, but he had no other choice. The mass stopped for a moment before screaming, a shrill scream that pierced their eardrums. They were sure that it was the kind of scream that could shatter glass. However, this one could shatter tempered and reinforced glass. Hands began to emerge from the other side of Naruto and tried to grab something to avoid approaching the seal, but they couldn't do anything. The mass was sucked towards the Auto Nin, seemingly out of nowhere, and left the same black trail, but more pronounced due to the parasite's desperation to escape. When it was close, the Auto Nin opened his mouth in the same way Kin had done earlier, with his eyes back to their usual position. There was no scream this time, just a muffled moan as the black mass began to enter through his mouth, causing almost the same thing that had happened with Kin, but in reverse. The girls on the branch watched in disgust. When the black mass finished being swallowed, the forest fell into complete silence, while the seal on the ninja's chest glowed slightly in red. The runes spun quickly before stopping and letting the ninja return to unconsciousness. Naruto, panting, moved away as the girls descended to see him. Damn, Anko said, impressed. She, better than anyone, had seen some of the most disturbing and disgusting scenes in life, but this took the prize. Yugao checked the guy, they needed him alive, and she didn't want to have gone through all that for nothing. He's doing quite well, a little worse than Kin due to the size of the mass, but nothing to be too concerned about, Yugao said. Let's go back to the tower, it will be more comfortable there, Anko suggested, looking from Naruto to Kin, both sleeping peacefully. Everyone agreed, and they began their journey back to the tower in the heart of the forest. It had been a very enlightening experience, and they now understood a bit more about how dangerous that seal had been and made them wonder what it had been planned for. If someone like Orochimaru had created it, it couldn't have been for anything good, that was for sure.